Kai kalbėsi. Tai laba diena klausantiems, laba diena.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, everyone hearing us, and our guests from Riga in particular. We're beginning our press conference during the quarantine lockdown. We have a roundtable debate with 4 experts, and we will look into biomass imports in Lithuania, the risks associated with that. And today we have the co-organizer of the roundtable debate, Madam Ieva Budraitė from the Green Policy Institute, the Lithuanian Greens Party leader and member, and we have with us Dr. Renata Boris, researcher from Vilniaus Gedimino Technical University, specializing in biomass combustion technology. With us today via the internet are Latvian experts, in particular Director of the Department of Environmental Protection from Ministry of Environmental Protection and Regional Development, Latvia, and one of the members of the board of the Lithuanian Land and Forest Owners Association, Mr. Mindaugas Šilininkas. Why are we talking on that subject, given the warmth at the seaside resorts today? Well, the reason is that the Baltpool biomass stock has now declared the prices for biofuels for the winter season. The general trend is that in this season the Lithuanian biofuels will be exchanged for the Belarusian imported biofuels. The stocks and auctions in Klaipėda Energy, the most remote site from Belarus border, have also been won by most probably the Belarus-driven biofuel. Previously, Lithuanian biofuels used to compete in Vilnius region and border regions with the Belarusian biofuels. And this was a matter of logistics and price. Today, however, the entire territory of Lithuania is covered by biofuels imports from Belarus. We have already talked on that on the 5th of May at a conference on fast exit from the critical situation for the Lithuanian biofuels market. A number of ministries have been contacted, including the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Environment, the Regulation Service, and the Baltpool Stock Exchange Service. And when we talked about the subject, we realized that in view of the experience from our neighbors, we can see that there's a risk to import very dangerous wood, which is radioactive. Radioactivity is something different from the seaside being infected with radioactive waste. No, we are importing the wood from Belarus, which is radioactive. This is why we decided to talk about that today. There are a number of reasons to have doubts about the health of controls in Lithuania when biofuels and wood is imported from Belarus. The Belarusian certificates are believed and trusted. So the importers' certificates that are tested and adopted in Belarus are trusted, and we don't have to trust them. Baltpool stock market of biofuels doesn't enforce the standard of and doesn't force the providers to substantiate whether we have the sufficient number of Lithuanian providers, producers to provide the country with biofuels. the imported Belarusian biofuels are often labeled as Lithuanian ones. The third reason is that heat production companies ask biofuel providers to sign documents that ensure that Lithuanians are providing their own biofuels, even though Lithuania is dominated already by the Belarusian biofuels. So the suppliers, the providers, only ask for a legal document to make sure they are buying a Lithuanian biofuel instead of the Belarusian one. This signature is not that relevant, though. Our colleagues from Latvia have conducted radioactivity research in ash emitted by biofuels in combustion process. Our colleagues from Latvia, including Madam Renata Boris, will talk about that. So are we sure we have good biofuels imported from Belarus? And doesn't our biofuel become radioactive in Lithuania? We need to make decisions today, because by September at the latest, because when the winter auctions are ended, and this will happen in early September, Lithuania will be filled with Belarusian biofuels and Belarusian wood. Our bioenergy regulation service says that the Belarusian biofuel is a little bit cheaper, but there is a risk attached. Only 15 to 20% of biofuels contribute to the bioenergy mix in Lithuania. The risk inherent with that is huge. I will give now the floor to Ieva, our co-organizer, Ieva Budraitė. Biofuel conversion in Lithuania from gas power plants is Lithuania's pride. And today's Lithuania's technologies and technological companies are exporting their know-how to Eastern neighbors, counseling them on how to transform the heating sector from gas to biofuel. But we have to talk about the risks inherent in the process as well. Let me give the floor to Ieva Budraitė now.
Ačiū Seimo. Thank you, Simonas, for making the introduction, and I would like to look at the matters from a different perspective now. As mentioned, I represent two organizations, Green Policy Institute, that works in advocacy of fight against climate changes, and also quite recently established movement against the Astravo nuclear power plant. I represent the principal approach of the Greens that the nuclear power energy is not compatible with the ecological requirements of the 21st century, which is based on three groups of arguments, primarily because the nuclear energy uses the depleting resources. In the processes, we have emissions of CO2. The second argument is related to radioactive waste, which generate a very big burden on the shoulders of the future generations. Because it's about 30 tons of radioactive waste that the nuclear power plant produces per year. Even some equipment related to neutralizing the radioactive waste still contribute to the process. And we need several thousand years in order to eliminate the impact of all that. The third argument is the inability to ensure security of this way of energy generation by 100%. And here I have in mind not only Chernobyl or Fukushima accidents, but also the idea that non-democratic regimes may be creating some evil plans, and that the expertise acquired may be used for malign purposes. Together with the movement, we are trying to communicate to the wide public globally that live under the so-called green wave, are concerned about the climate changes and ecology in general, and I believe that these arguments may be even more efficient than just environmental arguments alone. The topic of this conference, when we speak about radioactive timber produced in Chernobyl area, is one of the illustrations what danger nuclear power raises in general, and explaining this to the wide public may help to bring people together to demand clear control of all the processes. And as Mr. Gentvilo has mentioned, with the growing imports from Belarus in this case, we have to take responsibility for ensuring safety of the timber which is imported. Because we speak not only about radionuclides, but also other very hazardous materials that may have a very negative impact on the environment and people in the long run. Even in general, ash is considered to be a useful fertilizer. If farmers use radioactive fertilizers in their farming, a danger will emerge for all the crops, vegetables, whatever, and then both the organisms of people and animals will be affected as a consequence. And then all those isotopes and nucleides, when they get into human or bodies of animals, may cause very serious problems. We should also consider the impact on business sector as well, because the radiation which accumulates in the boilers requires extremely expensive cleaning activities in the long run. This is why the import issues are so important for people, business, and all the stakeholders, and I look very much forward to a fruitful discussion during which we could learn from Latvian experience and discuss the best solutions in Lithuania.
Thank you.
Prie Latvijos.
Thank you. On average, Lithuania uses about 4 million of biofuel per year. Latvia is located a bit far north, and this is why the probability is that Latvia probably will have smaller amounts from the contaminated areas in imports. However, starting from May this year, Latvia envisaged 3 times stricter measures compared to Lithuania for the imports of biofuel. which will mean that the absolute majority of Belarusian timber may be excluded, may be denied access to. I would like to give the floor to a representative of the Ministry of Environment, Silvia Nora, with a question: how have you come to this regulation, and what influenced your decisions to impose stricter requirements? In Riga, where you have found big amounts of contaminated materials and other things. We are looking forward to hear your presentation.
Good morning. So first, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to share our experience in this regard in Latvia. And I would like to apologize because we did not hear the translation in English except at the very end. So we apologize if we've missed part of the contextual information that you have provided. But hopefully what our information will be valuable nonetheless. So Latvia is currently in the development phase of draft legislation, which provides for setting a maximum limit value for the content of radionuclide cesium in wood imported into Latvia, if the wood is intended for use in Latvia as biomass fuel. The need to develop legislation in this field came after a case in 2018 when an increased level of ionizing radiation was detected in the wood burning ash of Riga's main thermal energy supplier, Riga Siltums. After that, the thermal energy supplier commissioned and carried out an extensive study analyzing the content of radionuclide cesium in wood and ash. The tests that were conducted demonstrated that the concentration of cesium in light ash, which is collected in the plant's electric filters, can reach 1,000 times the level of cesium originally present in the wood. Assessing the experience of other countries in the Baltic Sea region, including Lithuania's experience, and building on the results of radiological tests for wood and wood burning ash in Latvia, the draft regulation foresees that after the new provisions are in force, wood shall not be imported into Latvia with the cesium content exceeding 10 becquerels per kilo. And this is for that wood which is intended to be used as fuel in Latvia. Such a threshold for cesium content in wood is important for cesium produced in the plant to not exceed 10,000 becquerels per kilogram, which is the limit of radioactivity at which ash should be disposed at the disposal site for radioactive waste. If the radioactivity in the ash exceeds this threshold, the ash is subject to the Latvian radiation protection legislation. Currently, the new requirements are being discussed and harmonized with the responsible authorities and economic operators in Latvia. The draft legislative act is intended to be communicated to the European Commission in the fourth quarter of this year, thereby enabling EU member states to familiarize themselves with the requirements and to express their views. The basic objective of the plan provisions is to effectively protect the health of Latvia's population and environment from adverse effects of ionizing radiation, while at the same time creating the minimum possible burden for merchants who will be affected. We are pleased that discussions are being launched on the existing Lithuanian regulation with the intention of revising it, and we would be happy to receive any updates on the topic from your side. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please let us know.
Dėkoju, poniai.
Thank you, Madam Silvia Nora Kalninė, for your brief speech. I want a comment from you. You spoke about new filters in biomass plants which are replacing the gas-propelled plants. The radioactivity in the chimney ash is increasing by 1,000 times, and this is why, according to a European directive, it is then considered to be a radioactive byproduct. This has been established in Riga Siltums in 2018, and a debate followed, including research on that. Could you speak about the real situation which led you to today's draft amendment to legislation? What happened in Riga heating sector so that you needed to regulate at the national level the matters on imported wood and timber?
Ar girdite mus?
Can you hear us?
For the question, I hope I heard it correctly, and apologies if not so. It's difficult. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Mano klausimas yra apie...
2 years ago, in the Riga heating network, there was an establishment of radioactivity level which was compared to the radioactive waste. And this led to research on radioactivity in chimneys. And as far as I understand, modern biomass plants in Lithuania are increased by 1,000 times compared to primary biofuel, and this then becomes a biofuel waste which is produced by chimneys of radioactive plants. Do we understand you correctly?
So I apologize because it's difficult for us to follow the conference in one platform and the translation in another. So perhaps I will just repeat what we wanted to say. So if I understand correctly, then the question was about what led us to the situation as to why we came to discuss these regulations at this time. So it was discovered, as we stated in 2018, that Riga Siltums had detected that there was wood-burning ash that had a level of radiation that was a bit too high. And then based upon this, there was research that was conducted very extensively to understand whether this is a trend or whether this is a situation that is just in one or just very small experience. So it was after this research and tests that were conducted that it was found out that the levels of cesium are high, and that there needs to be some collective action to be able to improve the situation, as I said, to make sure that the adverse effects of iodinizing radiation do not affect the health of Latvia's population and also the environment. So we felt that there was enough research and tests to give a found basis upon which regulation should be introduced. And as we mentioned, also we looked at other countries in our area that also use wood for thermal heating, including Lithuania, who at that time already you had the 30 becquerels per kilo. So this was how we came to our current situation.
Ačiū labai, paldies už trumpą pranešimą.
Thank you very much, Paldies, for your brief presentation. Thank you for joining us. We are looking forward to hearing from you in the further debate. which will be interpreted into Lithuanian. And I will now give the floor into English, and I give the floor to Madam Boris. I know that in practice there have been hundreds of tests, and imported timber became very radioactive due to the filters in the plants. Do we have to be worried about the threefold lower standard for radioactivity in Lithuania? And is it okay that we failed to recognize that our timber comes from Belarus? Good morning, Member of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for presenting myself. I am Renata Boris from the Vilniaus Gedimino Technical University, and in my research I look into X-ray macroanalysis and X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy and fraction, where the crystal compounds between biomass products should be no lower than 5%, with no less than 5% of crystallic compounds between X-rays and biomass incineration products. It is possible to determine even the smallest amount of chemical element or oxide salt. Our laboratories conduct research, and my PhD thesis that are related to the longevity of refractory materials, which is relevant in heating plants run on biofuels. The heating plants are in need of cleaning, which costs a lot, and the maintenance costs are also high. Lithuania is intending to, in recent years, a number of new energy installations for the combustion of biofuels. These plants accumulate huge amounts of ash after the entire combustion process. Biofuel ash may also contain radioactive amounts of potassium, strontium, and cesium, whose allowed quantities are declared in the rules on wood and timber fuel ash contaminated with radionuclides. Construction and building materials that contain biofuels ash must comply with a Lithuanian hygiene norm called Basic Radiation Protection Standards. The radioactive ash is becoming increasingly radioactive because biofuels are being increasingly used in construction. We have a specific... We work with these materials in particular. As for ash, once again, they come from filters, modern electrostatic filters in particular, which are increasingly used in heating plants. There are also electrostatic ash. And there, the amounts of waste are a thousand-fold higher, depending on the dampness of timber. So in this electrostatic ash, there's a lot of waste, radioactive waste. That's why I believe it's very important to control them very stringently. Thank you. Thank you so much indeed. And we have with us a practical expert who will join us via the internet. His name is Mr. Šilininkas and he's owner, Land and Forest Owners Association board member. He's been using ash from biomass plants, using it for fertilizing the land. And we can see huge loopholes in the control system in Lithuania for the use of ash and for the checking of their cleanliness. And this ash can also be used for growing foodstuffs, so that's very dangerous. Could you share your practical experience, Mr. Šilininkas? Good morning.
Naudojam tręšimui būtent.
Good morning. We have been using ash for fertilizers, particularly in biomass case. And from what we have seen so far, all that movement from Belarus, particularly in the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we are really quite concerned today about the situation. As Lithuania probably has the strictest regulation for the imports of biomass from Belarus and other affected regions affected by Chernobyl accident. However, it has the biggest import of biofuel in Europe at the same time. So on the one hand, we seem to have 10 times stricter requirements as far as the import is concerned, but at the same time, we are importing huge amounts of timber. And today, we speak about 800,000 tons per year. This year, we may reach even 1 million when Vilnius cogeneration plant is opened. Probably half of the fuel will come from Belarus, and the amounts will even grow further. And as we heard, Latvians are going to have the requirement of 10 becquerels in the future. The question still arises how they are going to impose the control, because the amount of samples taken is quite limited, so it would be very complicated to find the contamination, because we are speaking about a needle in the stack of hay. Today, most biofuel is coming by railway, and we can probably reach the most contaminated areas that way. We read in the press that even foodstuffs are also supplied from those areas sometimes. So probably nobody in Lithuania would be able to guarantee that things are not coming from those contaminated areas today. We have been in this situation after Chernobyl for about 30 years, and as you know, it takes quite a long time for trees to grow up. So all the biofuel that is arriving today has been affected by Chernobyl accident to a higher or lesser degree. Because you will hardly find trees being cut when they are less than 30 years old. Based on our experience with biofuel ash in Lithuania, I can say that we haven't found any cases where the contamination will exceed the allowed levels. But in any case, we see that the difference between Lithuanian biofuel and the Belarusian biofuel, which is imported in terms of radioactivity, is 10 to 15 times. And if we think about the huge amounts of biofuel imported into the country, today we have about 20,000 tons of Belarusian ash. It means that every year we are importing huge amounts of radioactive cesium every year, which is spread here in Lithuania. The question remains whether after spreading it, it still remains radioactive or not, is not answered. However, this is something to be taken into consideration. We don't have other ways to prove the contamination other than the laboratory tests, samples taken to the laboratory, and then we have to decide whether we should make tests on each railway carriage or do it some other way. It remains to be answered. Thank you. Thank you, Mindaugas, as we are pressed by time. In conclusion, I can say that the goal of this conference, let me repeat it, was to answer the question why Latvians are going to impose 3 times stricter standards for radioactive timber. Based on radioactive directive, the parameter exceeding 10,000 becquerels is to be considered a radioactive waste, which means that for the imported timber in Lithuania we have 30 becquerels requirement today, but when the concentration increases by 1,000%, it becomes radioactive waste. Latvia and Lithuania are the markets in the closest proximity to Belarus, where the timber is imported. The Belarusian biofuel is imported to Lithuania quite intensively, and the danger increases that the timber is badly contaminated and that in modern biofuel plants, our ash may turn into radioactive waste, and the ash which is spread to the environment through chimneys and other ways may cause danger for our environment. And this is why we have to raise the question whether it's worthwhile doing this and whether the control mechanisms are really effective. We have assumptions to doubt about it because heat suppliers often ask for declarations to make sure that radioactive timber from Belarus is not imported, whereas the stock exchange does not look into the matter deep enough. And I believe that the Latvian example has to be considered very seriously, because this is the result of the activities of 2 or 3 years, very serious tests, over 200 tests in different circumstances, and as a result, the regulation has been revised. Lithuania has to more attentively look at what ash we receive after the processes.
Galėčiau pridurti tai, kad
What I can add is that, as I've mentioned before, the biomass sector in Lithuania is a success story overall. It has transformed when biofuel was when gas was replaced by biofuel. 60% of CO2 emissions have been saved, and 7,500 jobs were created. The annual turnover amounted to 400 million euros, and this reputation may be destroyed if we fail to control the aspects Simono Gentvilo has talked about, and if we fail to raise the issue in our institutions, if our bulk pool stock exchange takes on the role, and with the radiation safety center, the environmental institutions, and the border control and looks into the affair in their respective jurisdiction. We have to do this in order to preserve our good reputation and the profile of this kind of energy. I have a question from the screen, as far as I've seen, addressed to me, related to the Astravo AE nuclear power plant. The question is on the provisions of the movement against the Astravo nuclear power plant to various institutions that state as to how to protect ourselves from the threat from the Astravo nuclear power plant. Our organization is working on providing notes to the President's office and the Seimos. In March, in fact, we had drafted a resolution on leaving the Vienna Convention. And as far as I've seen, there's been no reply to that. The Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Foreign Affairs failed to find contact on that, and the President's office fails to have an agreement with the executive. It seems that there's little enthusiasm to solve the problem. We hope that the public will make pressure on the government to keep working on that, and this will be allowing us to appeal to the international community in view of the environmental aspects apart from the other ones. Thank you, Ieva. Belarus is among the most among the countries that have suffered most from nuclear disasters. On Friday, fuel rods have been transported to the Astravo AE nuclear power plant. We are thinking of how to join the international monitoring mission, but I'm not sure about it. As to the Astravo AE nuclear power plant, I have a question. What is your viewpoint on Lithuania's preparation for a case of a disaster of a nuclear power plant? How do you evaluate that? I have a negative assessment of that, especially in terms of civil protection. Very few people know in specific terms what to do if things happen in terms of iodine use and in terms of where to go and what to do. We can see that even the systems on the phones, the warning signals don't work. So even though the threat is becoming real and increasingly real, at that we are not prepared, and citizens are not prepared. Is it possible for the both countries to jointly agree to not buy energy from the nuclear power plant in Astravets, and if so, then how? Personally, I'm still optimistic. I still believe it's possible. However, the more intensive dialogue at the highest political level is needed. The dialogue needs to be more specific, and we have to talk about the threats for the environment and other threats as well. Thank you. Are there any more questions? If not, I'm grateful to everyone who took part in the meeting. I'm grateful to our guests. Thank you for the tele-bridge with Latvia and our colleagues from Latvia and from the Ministry of Environment and Regions. I thank our interpreters, the technical staff, who helped us to address the challenge of bridging the Lithuania with Latvia. Thank you very much indeed.